I've hinted at it several times that I was going to do an acrylic sometime. So I thought, why not today? And I haven't done acrylics for quite some time. I've basically done them pretty kind of like I'm doing today as demonstrations. So this is a demonstration. And it's kind of how to use acrylics. I'm working on hardboard. I tend to like working on a hardboard better than I do on canvas with acrylics. It is gessoed. It is not white. For example, that's white right there. So you can see it's kind of a, I basically mixed a little blue and umber and a lot of gesso together and came up with a kind of a neutral, kind of warm tone, very light. I don't want to go dark because I want to talk a little bit about acrylics. Acrylics are inherently a semi-transparent medium. In other words, to get a really good opacity, generally you need to do layers. Now there are acrylics called acrylic wash or aqua wash that is more opaque. Since I work with acrylics really since the 70s, particularly as in my illustration career, not in my fine art career too much, but in my illustration career. I worked with them with basically Liquitex and eventually Golden, which I think Golden's probably, for me, the top of the line in terms of acrylics. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with this, and you're going to notice that I don't paint much differently than I do in oils. The difference is I may be a little more transparent in the beginning. I'll talk a little bit about that. First thing I'm going to do is kind of get a sky tone in, just to kind of give an idea of where I'm at. So I'm basically just taking a titanium white, a little bit of yellow ochre. That's it. Pretty much right about there. So that's basically titanium white, just a touch of yellow ochre. And it is kind of transparent because I can see that. I don't know if you can see it but you can see the brush marks through it. Now, I use those. I use that as part of the painting process. I mean, I think that's part of the beauty is to see the, in oil, you refer to it as thin to thick. In acrylics, I don't even refer to it as that. I refer to it as kind of transparent to opaque. This is an opaque color that I'm using, but even when you use an opaque color in acrylics, it generally doesn't go down real thick and opaque, and it takes a while, maybe 2 or 3 layers before you get the opacity. Now, I like that. I think that is something I work with. I don't try to do something different. I don't try to overpower. Use acrylics for what acrylics are good for. And acrylics are good for drying fast and working kind of from a semi-transparent or translucent, if you will, kind of characteristic to a much more opaque. And so I like it because I can sneak up on my opaques. And because I can't get quite as bright or as dark as I really want right from the outset, I use that as a positive. Now, I know people that are so used to working with other mediums that to them, that's a negative. And to me, it's positive. So I'm just kind of rubbing in basically where I kind of want the sky. I did a very quick compositional sketch down here to start with. So now, if I just took the same color, I want to show you something. This is one of the beauties of acrylic. So I haven't mixed a new color. I've just basically taken the same color right over the color I used, but because this is dry already, watch, see how much brighter that gets? So this is the advantage. You can layer your acrylics up and get brighter and brighter and brighter as you move throughout your painting. So I'm just going to start with that. Now, next thing I'm going to do is way back there, there's kind of a blue mountain way in the distance. So we're just going to kind of throw that in. A little bit of a cool, right? Maybe a little bit darker. It's a little timid with that. And it's blue. I'll call my palette out for you. It's very similar to when I work with oils. So I have titanium white. I have what they call in golden primary yellow. Then I have a yellow ochre, a cad red medium. I didn't have a light. I prefer a light, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue. Then I felt like I needed a little snap, so I threw a manganese blue in as a. Then I use sap green and burnt umber. It's that simple. It's really pretty much the same palette I work with when I work, with oils. So let's kind of lay some of this area in, and we need a color. So I'm going to take yellow ochre and yellow, and I still have a little residue in this brush. Now I want to talk a little bit about the drawbacks of acrylics. Let's talk about the drawbacks, okay? You can't get it out of your clothes easy. That's probably the biggest drawback, I think. Some people say they can't get good color with it. I say I can get stronger color with acrylics than I can with oil. So I have that discussion, argument, whatever you want to call it, with people all the time. A lot of that just simply because I've worked with acrylics for so long. And again, I don't work with them as much anymore. That's out of choice. I switched over to oils when I really pursued more of a fine art career. And oils was a learning curve. There are some differences. Number one, particularly if you're painting it like an olive crema, because you're painting wet into wet. Here, you can paint wet into wet, but generally you're painting, wet next to dry. And for me, that's an advantage. People don't like it because they can't blend. That's why I like it. So what is not good for one person may be really good for another. So I'm mixing up a dark now, blue and brown, and I still probably have a little residue. And I want to get this dark mass coming down.
So Donna Day is asking, unfortunately, the acrylics dry darker. So how do you make a section brighter again if you went too dark?
Brighter?
Do you lay down a white first?
No. I'm sure I'll do that in this, but no, you don't lay down a white first. You basically come as close as you can to the color you want. And then if you need more intensity, you glaze it. You can't glaze over oil until it's dry. Acrylic dries so fast, you can glaze over it immediately.
And bring up the value to
you can bring up
lighter.
The value is up. White is the only way you bring up the value. Mm-hmm. So if you use white and you find out that it goes too dead on you, you just, again, glaze in the color. I'm going to unify some of these darks, just in case you're wondering. I sketched this whole darn thing in and realized I left out the little bin. So I kind of threw that in at the last minute. I'm going to throw some darks into him because he's basically in shadow. So I'm going to use almost the blue and the brown, a little bit kind of a washy tone. So it's not going to be real opaque. And that isn't either, believe it or not. And we're going to start up here. And I'm using the same brush for expedient. If I were spending a longer time, I might be using a different brush. But this brush, this little gesso brush, I can get a lot laid in quickly. I can get my first layer on. And because acrylic, I know I'm going to need more than one layer. I really need to get those first tones down as rapidly as I can. There's some leaves on top of him. I'm just going to paint right through them. And I actually sketched them in there, but I'm not going to worry about painting around them. I generally don't like to paint around things just because I think it adds, I call it puzzle piece painting. And I know people that have had classes with me have heard me use that term. When you paint a color up to another color, up to another color, up to another color, you kind of hope they all work together. I don't have that much success with that. And it's a very slow process comparatively.
You're not using any medium, are you?
No, the only medium I use is water. And I know I can see I'm going to need more blue and brown because of the layering, because to get dark, that you may look at that and think it's pretty dark. It's really not.
You have your tubes right there.
Yeah, I have most of the colors handy because I knew I was going to probably need a couple of them. So I kind of like some of the brushy stuff that I'm getting there, kind of that transparent. I think hopefully I'm going to leave some of that. Back of the shirt. Let's paint his whole shirt in. Let's get that out of the way too. Okay, now I'm going to paint the shadow of the headdress or the scarf, excuse me, headdress. And all I did is I just added red to the same color and a little white to the same color that I was just using. That's going to be too dark, I think. Yep, a little too dark. So maybe I throw a little ochre into it too. Ochre. I think this did the trick. I like to paint it too dark in the beginning. And then turn, as I like to say, turn the lights on. So there's a head scarf, a little tail coming off of it, down over the eyes. Now let's get this flesh tone in. And one of the things you got to watch out with acrylics, if I let that set for too long, it's going to dry on the brush. So I've got to either plunk it in the water, which I'm not going to because I'm going to use it again, or I've got to pick it up in a little bit, which is what I'm going to do. And the reason I'm saying is I'm going to paint in with this little number 8, kind of a flesh tone. And I see basically 2 flesh tones. One is very similar to this. So I can use that color, but just maybe a tad of white. And what we're going to do is we're going to lay it in right here. It's a little cooler than I want it, but you know, it's first layer. So I'm more concerned that the value is right than the color is right.
So Laurel is saying you talk about glazing a lot, but do you use dry brushing to bring up the values too when necessary?
No, I generally don't use dry brushing. I usually use kind of a wash. If I need to bring a light up, you're going to see it because I'm not painting any of the lights yet. So you're going to see literally the way I bring it up. So I'm not as dark as I could be, and I'm not as light much. And I've used that same premise over and over, and I've stated it many, many times when I paint with oils. All right. So I'm not doing conceptually, I'm painting the same way. All right, I'm going to hit, he's got a mustache too, kind of a nice little touch. This, by the way, this photo is probably 25 years old, and it's from my archives. And so what I did is I went and had it blown up. Just, you know, I didn't have the negative anymore, so I just took the photo into my friend Lee Staples and had them blow it up. So there's kind of the shadow in his face. And there are darker areas, just like this is just a little bit lighter. And then there's a warmer area in his flesh tone. So for that, I just took some ochre, some red. Let's see where we're at here. Maybe a little too bright, but let's see. Probably not too bad. Do as much overlapping down on the cheekbone, a little bit up in the ear. Didn't mean to leave these areas all that light. So we've got the face in too dark, which is exactly where I want it. Everything should feel a little too dark, except my deep darks. My deep darks I'm going to add because I have not added anything. That's the only area right now that's really dark. That area, because the paint's a little bit more dense, but generally most of this is kind of mid-tone oriented. So he's kind of in there, right? I have basically, let's call it a placeholder. I have him where I want him, and I have the basic dark values where I want them. Looks like his hand is hidden behind the leaf. They wear gloves, I know. So let's start to lay in some other areas. I'm going to go back to this brush. So what I do usually with acrylics is I'll take that brush and I'll slosh it around in the water so it's got a lot of water in it. I don't want the acrylics to dry in the brush. If they do, there are ways to get them out, but honestly, it's a pain. So, and then again, one of the detriments of acrylics is that. So this is a little more in the violet range right now, just so you guys know. And I'm just looking for some dark spots that I could pop in down in here. That's grapes. keep it as abstract and free as you possibly can without painting necessarily this fast. I'm getting, because I've got water in the brush, I'm getting some really interesting transparency. So let's go down. This is in shadow down here. It gets a little bit lighter than the dark. So all I did is I just took white and added it to basic that color. And I'm just going to indicate where the shadow is, kind of right in here. And we got some ground plane darks. Back here, a little bluer. I just made it a little bluer, touch lighter, not much. Right here at the base of this, a little bit, some weeds down in here. I'm just looking for these slight horizontals that so a little bit of, let's get a little base down so I can come over with some stuff later. That's quite transparent there. And I don't mind that at all. Some of that transparent I may use. And some nice dark grapes in the blue. This is an old vine Zinfandel vineyard owned by Rodney Strong Winery. And it's in Windsor. So I hope what you guys are seeing is what I'm kind of painting is almost an abstracted version of what you see in reality. So let's go for some of the lighter greens. So I go back to the yellow, pick up either a sap or a blue, maybe a little ochre so the green doesn't get too acidy. And that's not bad. Let's just start laying in some. Now this is big in the background. I don't like that at all, so I have not included that in case you're wondering. Yeah, it's an awkward vine, and it's I just don't like the design, what it's doing to the design of the piece itself.
So Mitchell says, first he says, I need a glass of wine, and he misses the tastings in Napa, but what makes you decide a photo reference? What do you look for?
Good question. Let me try and I'll try and explain it as I'm thinking. I look for composition. I look for light and mood. I look for gesture in the figure when I've got a figure in there. And those are probably the main things that make me want to paint something. You know, the way the figure relates to the vine, I don't like stiff figures at all. So, you know, and figures when they're moving like this get to be tricky. They're not, you know, you have to shoot a lot because you can, it's like, I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen photographs of a guy pitching a baseball. I've used this many times when I discuss it. When a guy pitches, if you stop him at certain spots, it looks awful. I mean, it looks like the guy's arm is broken, or it just looks, you know, uncoordinated. So you have to kind of be very careful. The same thing as when you do anybody in motion, doing anything, any sort of movement or motion, you're going to have that same kind of consideration. So that's part of it, that they don't look awkward. They don't look stiff. They feel like it feels natural. So when that has to do with the figures, the rest of it has to do with lighting and composition.
So probably want to know about do acrylics dry darker?
Acrylics, oh God, people ask that question all the time. No, actually, I think they dry a little lighter myself. You know, you're gonna get different variations. You just get, all I can tell you guys is you get used to it. You just get used to it. And so it doesn't become a major problem. I know people get so uptight about the fact that it doesn't dry the same. I'll tell you, the only two mediums that I know that dry pretty much the same are oils and gouache. Other than that, most of them dry a little different, whether it's casein, Obviously pastel, if you spray fix it, it looks different than when you first lay it on. So even pastel has got its own problems. I see what I need to do is make sure I cover enough here, because I'm not covering as much of, I'd rather cover too much and have to paint over it than I would cover not enough. And I'm manipulating warms and cools right now, using ochre, using a little red and green, all kind of together. A little too red on me there, so I need some more ochre.
So Tom mentioned that you taught him years ago that you can start an illustration of acrylics and finish with oil to achieve your goal. Can you speak about that?
Yep, you just did. You can. That's exactly right. I generally don't. I tend to be a little more of a purist, but I have done it on very rare occasion. You can begin. You can always paint oil over any medium, but you cannot paint acrylic over oil. So that's very important to keep in mind. So if you have I had a friend of mine who didn't like what he was doing, and so he wiped it out. It was in oil, wiped it out in gesso, and then repainted over it. Well, within about 5 years, that's half that oil is going to fall right off the painting. It's just oil. You cannot paint oil over acrylic. Excuse me, you cannot paint acrylic. Boy, don't quote me on that. You cannot paint acrylic over oil.
I think you talked about it last week when you did the large vineyard commissions.
Yeah, I did a God, several years ago. I did a commission I did 2 commissions, large commissions for a gentleman up not far from here, up in Shiloh, the Shiloh part of Windsor, and they were wonderful, fun commissions. They were very large. One was over 6 feet, and one was, I think, 5 feet something. Well, I got the first one done. He needed them by a certain date, and I was running short of time on that second one, and I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lay it in acrylics, because I know I can actually paint much faster in acrylics than I can in oil. So I laid it in acrylics, finished it off in oil, and it ends up being an oil painting. Some of your problem solving is done in acrylics, and then your final judgment calls are in oil. So it's fun. It's absolutely a cool way to work. And I know illustrators that have done that. I haven't. I usually either work in oil or I work in acrylic when I was illustrating. I very seldom, I can't think of, I must have done it, but right off the top of my head, I can't think of a project that I did that on. But I know a couple of oil painters that they will, paint a beautiful portrait, and then they'll do the suit in acrylics and then come over and finish it in oils. I know a couple of guys that do that. Nothing wrong with it. Anyway, whatever works for you, as long as it's archival, and which means it'll last. It's not going to fall off your, the paint isn't going to fall off the canvas. So I've been on this just about 25 minutes. So you can see I'm probably faster than I am if I were doing an oil.
So Lynn said, do you think the majority of artists go from acrylics into oil?
Yeah. Yep. Those that work in acrylic. I know a lot of people I have friends that are absolutely fantastic artists that hate acrylics. And I've always said, I've actually done demos for our faculty in acrylics to show them, because some students want to work in acrylics, to show them how incredibly, I'll give you, I'm going with an opinion now. I believe acrylics are the most versatile medium, period.
Why?
Because you can make acrylics look like watercolor. You can make acrylics, and because you can glaze and layer it so many times so quickly compared to oil. I mean, gouache is wonderful. Gouache for me is a cool medium, but I've never been successful working large with gouache. When I say large, 18 by 24, 24 or larger. Okay, I am coming light over that. You notice that? That's not going to dry it has a little bit of a transparency to it, which again, think about it. If you're not making your paint tremendously opaque and you have a lot of water in it, it's going to dry with some of that underneath color coming through. So another thing to consider when you're painting. Let's get that ear in. I don't want to get into him too much because my natural tendency is to want to fuss on figures. So I'm gonna let's fuss. Oh, I've got to get more of this landscape in because that's where 90% of the hard work is going to come in. So I always like to use a phrase where I say, get the work done, then have fun. In other words, if there's areas that you know that are going to take more time and a little bit more, go ahead and get them in there, and then you can go back and have your fun, say on the figure, which it may not be for everybody, but for me, that is the fun. You know, some people may find the figure more tedious. Just laying some other colors down. I don't even care if they're right. I'm looking more for value than I am color right now, because I'm going to be coming over it with a lot of. Okay, this guy, I just noticed, has a cast shadow going out that way. So I'm just using colors that I have on my palette. None of them have dried up because I'm constantly dipping back into them. So back of his, let's get a little bit of definition in his. Oh, you know what? I'm just going to go into his shirt. I got to get more of this ground plane in this area here, and I need a little bit more underpainting before I do. So real thin, watery.
Mitchell has a good point. Maybe the oil bias is due to its long history.
Yeah.
Acrylics are relatively.
Absolutely. Acrylics are plastic. We had one guy, I remember many years ago, he's like, we can't paint acrylics. Acrylics are like painting with plastic. Yeah, that's true. Is that bad? It's up to you. But you're right, Mitchell. It is the historical aspect of oils. But what here's that proverbial they again. What they say about acrylics is acrylics will last longer than oils. I've heard that over and over. And that comes from chemists. And it's based on the fact that acrylics are plastic. Plastic will outlast anything oil-based, you know, good or bad, whether you like plastic or not. It's a fact. So let's pick up some white now. I'm going to mix up that ground plane. I've got a lot of residue in this brush, residue of other colors. And I'm going to put a lot of ochre in with that because I want it to feel warm. But I don't want it as light as the sky. And I do want 2 or 3 layers. So I don't want it really bright. That may be brighter than I want it. Let's throw a little umber into that. Okay, I'm just going to start really loosely indicating ground plane. Say a great little dry stroke. Why? Over dry paint. If I did that over oil, I wouldn't be getting that characteristic. So use acrylics for what acrylics have to offer. Don't try and automatically think, well, it doesn't work because I'm so used to oils. You know, then don't use acrylics. They're a great medium. I mean, all these mediums that people paint with are great mediums. There's nothing, it's not that one medium's better than the other. A lot of it has to do with your own personal, the way you feel about the way the paint goes down. I mean, I know people that, like I said, that hate acrylics. And I know people that absolutely love acrylics. Just think, you know, I keep thinking of the realist wildlife painter, Robert Bateman, who does some of the most incredible acrylic work around. And I personally, I like his acrylic work better than his oil work. I think his acrylic work is just stunning. But you're going to find different opinions regarding that. Although most people I've talked to that know his work pretty much agree with what I just said, that his acrylic work is It's a little cooler over here. So I added a little blue to the same color I was working with. But I will come over it with 2 or 3 other colors. So I want the layers. Another thing, let me mention this. Advantage acrylics, layers. You can get your layers much quicker with acrylics than you can with oil. Simply due to the concept of the drying time. It dries quicker. And that's advantageous. So I'm mixing warms and cools together a lot. Blues and browns, a little bit of red every now and then. So I'm getting a lot of value variation along with color back in here, because I want to be able to come over with some nice lights at the end. They break some of this stuff up so it isn't quite as harsh, and it becomes a great piece of underpainting. It really becomes kind of something really neat that you can work with. Well, I kind of did away with that towel. I've done also, I need to add more ochre. Ochre is kind of a base color for this. There's a lot of ochre because there's a lot of yellows in it. And to warm the lights up, I'm using ochre. So in many respects, I would say ochre, ultramarine, and umber, those 3 colors are kind of go-to here and there. So there's ultramarine and umber. Went a little cold on me. So what did I do? I threw a little bit of alizarin into it. There we go.
So Laura wants to know, how do you deal with your palette, the colors dry, remixing, and so forth?
Well, first of all these colors that are on my palette right now are still wet because I'm using them over and over. So I've never worried about coming up with the exact same color. In fact, I think part of the beauty of painting is when that color isn't the same. When it's close, it adds, I don't know, it just adds some sort of wonderful characteristic to the paint rather than constantly matching that exactly. Now, even if you're a super realist, when I remember a painting, somebody asked me the question, so I can answer it now. I do remember a painting that I did for Thomasville Furniture years ago. Very involved. It was like eight or nine figures in it. But there was all kinds. It was an ad for the furniture, but there were figures. It was this Thanksgiving scene, and in order to get the furniture clean and accurate, I painted all the furniture in acrylics, and all the stuff in the china cabinet, everything I painted in acrylics, and then I came in and all the figures were done in oil. So I have done that. I knew I had, it just didn't come to mind, and it worked. It worked fine. I mean, if you looked at the total painting, you wouldn't know that some was acrylic and some were oils. I know. In fact, if I look at a lot of work, I have to look really close to even see if I can tell. So I'm going to go in on the shirt a little bit darker. So what am I using? Blue and brown together.
So both Polly and John were asking if you use golden open acrylics that can be reactivated for up to 24 hours or so.
So what was that?
Golden it's called open acrylics.
It could be. I don't know. You know more than I do. I'm old school.
We've used those.
I don't care about react. I don't.
But you did. Tom mentioned the paper towel trick, so I don't know if you mentioned that when you.
No, you see this? What I do is I take all my paints are squeezed out on. I take a paper towel and I fold it like this. I learned this my first week of art school. Fold it, wet it, dip it in water, lay it down, and then squeeze my paint out on that. And so that's where I lay my paint out. Now I mix on my palette, which is a little bit different, but literally that's how I start. So I have a basis. So you can see, I think you can see that I've gone quite a bit darker all of a sudden up in here.
Where?
On the gentleman's shirt.
Yeah.
And well, I've got that. Slowly soften it in. I'm being a little more careful now. Well, I've got that nice rich dark, but add a little bit more brown to it so it stays on the warm side. And we're going to add his eye sockets in. And this little tough to pair. So we're gonna leave it alone. Let's keep going back. I'm gonna keep going back to different areas. Try not to get into any one area until I'm ready to finish, as far as refinement goes. All right, because it's very easy to get hung up in one area, and I've watched my time particularly as I'm doing demos. I don't watch, obviously, I don't sit there generally and watch my time. I did as an illustrator, by the way. I watched my time very carefully as an illustrator. And I prided myself on never, ever, and I mean this honest to God truth, missing a deadline. Same with school. I never missed a deadline when I was in school. I had very good work habits. Now the downside of that is sometimes I turned in work that I didn't think was that good. Why? It's called deadline. So
I never even thought of missing a deadline.
what's that?
I was saying I never thought of missing a deadline when I was in school.
Yeah.
I was too scared.
But a lot of times individuals nowadays, they don't want to be embarrassed. And it's a hell with you, be embarrassed. I mean, come on. We all aren't geniuses. I mean, as Andrew Loomis wrote in his great book, Creative Illustration, every time you sit down, you can't be a genius. And that's why you always get some stronger, some weaker. You're always going to get pieces that like that. I say that about every piece I do. And sometimes it's not till a week later that I think, hey, that's actually pretty good. Maybe when I'm done with it, I go, yuck, and all of a sudden I look at it a week later and I go, geez, why did I think that was that bad? Of course, the opposite holds true also, where I think I nailed one, right? And I look at it 2 weeks later and I went, oh man, look at those problems. So
Barry said you learned those good work habits at Cupertino High School.
that's it. Let's hear a shout out for Cupertino High School for sure. It's where I grew up. It's where I did develop, I would say, work habits. I agree completely. And unlike many people, have super and fond memories of that time in my life and that particular area where I grew up. Some people just want to get away. I got away because the art school I wanted to go to was away. A little overlapping, huh? His head's looking really clumsy. You know what? I don't want to worry about that right now. I don't think it's real strong, but we'll hopefully make it that way. I got kills.
So the lighter values that you're coming in with over him, are they thick? That's my question.
Are they thick?
Yeah, is the consistency of the paint?
No, nothing's thick right now. They're thicker. So it depends upon your definition of thick. They aren't real thick. I can get that way. I will maybe right at the end. But I'm just kind of coming in with as many different variations. Now there's light. If you look at it, a little yellow and white, a little more white mixing right in there. So it's a nice light warm on this leaf, and it's right. And that's pretty opaque. It's not real thick. And so that's how you illuminate things at the end. Until then, I want everything not necessarily to go that light. I'll bring light into it as we progress. Like I can see a little bit happening, and I just mix more ochre with that same light color. You can see some back in here. So there's a little bit of opacity and add a little warmth. So I get all the different kind of color variations going on.
Laura wants to know if you use the acrylic mostly pure pigment and not much water, just enough to move the paint around.
I use more water in the beginning, less at the end. Yeah, a little bit more of what you might consider a wash type of a usage in the very beginning, and more much less water. Like when I want to cover this, that's a dark area. So that's more paint, less water. I got to lay out more yellow too. I got to step back for like 1 second. Okay, I'm getting the activity. I'm just trying to get enough activity to make it believable. And once we do that, then I'll revert back to my character. But it's very easy to get hung up in only him and ignore the rest of the painting, and then all of a sudden realize, my God, I've got all this to do and I've only got 20 minutes. So I've got him set up where, and this probably is more my illustration background, but where I know if I could pull him off in 10 minutes, I can do a better job in 20 minutes, I can do a better job in 30 minutes, and that kind of a thing. So that's something that we're always somewhat dealing with whenever you're painting. At least I am. I laid out some more yellow because I got to get some yellows in over this, like in there. You use different parts of your brush to give, because nothing is that clear cut. Nothing is like, there's a little lighter yellows up in here.
You're still using the larger brush?
I've done almost everything with this brush. I'm going to switch down when I get into really refining him. Maybe some, as I get into the grapes, refining some of this stuff. But I need the freedom of the kind of paint strokes. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm not concerned, because I am, about the character of the strokes. It's a little thinner. Truthfully, I mentioned the artist Robert Bateman. If none of you guys have seen his, look him up. Anything you see of his that is really tight, really refined, is acrylic. Another great acrylic painter who I happen to be fortunate to be friends with is Gil Dillinger, who's just a superb acrylic painter. John Poon. Thanks. I forgot about John. John Poon. John is a superb oil painter, but he switched over to acrylics years ago. I think for health reasons, if I'm not mistaken. But another wonderful acrylic painter. And people will use acrylics for that reason. It's, I know I've used, one of these days I'll do it, I promise, as a water soluble oil. I just am not, I haven't painted enough in them. So if I paint, and I've never painted large in them, but if I do, I will just write it off to experimenting in front of you, because it's really what I'd be doing.
Ray was saying a lot of his pieces are mostly.
What?
Ray was saying a lot of his pieces are mostly acrylic with a finishing layer of oil.
A lot of whose?
Ray.
Oh, he works with acrylics? Yeah. Well, that's because you do a lot of illustration, right? And that generally is not an unusual way of working. Like I said, I just tend to be a little bit, if I work with watercolor, I tend not to like to use opaques, for example, because I'm a little bit more of a purist, and I know Sargent made it okay to use opaques, but I try not to. And I need to go one stage further and say, I don't work with watercolors all that often. Mm-hmm. It's another great medium though, guys. All these mediums are fantastic. It just takes time to get a feel for them. And even though I don't paint in acrylics hardly at all anymore, I had 30 years where that's basically what I painted in, almost exclusively. So I feel like I can at least switch over to that a little more comfortably than I can some other mediums. Here's Here's some nice yellow. That's opaque. That's pretty thick. See, it's sitting down on top. And so I want there to be that really nice underpainting before I come over it. I've got to get it chopped up enough for it's probably that's a good term, huh? I got to get it chopped up enough so it feels like that looks. All right, so it feels like that looks. So there's a little bit of light here and there on these bright leaves. So I took the yellow and I added white to it. And it's pretty opaque. If I really wanted to, I could even use a knife, but I'm not going to. I'm just trying to keep a nice fresh, trying to keep the whole thing fresh. A little more ochre into that color. And leaves that sit on top now is what I'm trying to hit. And I can't get them all, so I just have to kind of pick and choose. Now, if I wanted to give myself the time, I could probably get them all, but I don't want to. It's again, and I've mentioned many times, this is more of an alla prima approach. In fact, I'm not even going to say more of. It's an alla prima approach because it means all the painting is done at once. I see some cools. That's why I'm just kind of mixing a little bit of blue. So we're getting a little bit more activity. And if I stand back here a little bit, I think I need to go into a shirt and get a little bit going on in there. Let's see, what am I going to use? I think I'll start with this. We're going to start back in here. We're going to add the cool, and I'm trying the manganese, but I need to kill it. Now I'm going to throw more ultramarine and a little bit of alizarin crimson into it. Let's see what color this is. I think it's going to be too light. No, it's not. Okay, I can live with that. Throw a little more ultramarine, and I'm not going in for the real lights on a shirt yet. What I'm doing now has more to do with drawing, value mixing, and drawing than it does anything else. Soften that. So we got a little bit of light coming in, not as much as I want, but I got a little bit of light. I mean, I'm going to darken that a little color with some more ultramarine and some more umber. So it's just a darker version of what I did, and I can put some of these indications in the shadow. There, a little bit on the shoulder. So just a little, it's a darker version of this, and then I'm going to do a lighter version.
What do you like about the color manganese?
Excuse me? What do I like about the color?
Yeah.
I try to get, okay. It's a brighter blue without going to phthalo. I looked, I was actually going to get a cerulean because I was out of cerulean and they didn't have it. So I went to manganese. That's what I like about manganese. It's a good color. It's a strong blue. It's a blue-green. In fact, I just mixed it down and with a little bit of white. It went a little too white on me. So I want to go with a lighter version for the light hitting on that the back of that shirt. And I want that to have a little bit more manganese. Let's see, this may not be light enough. No, it's not. More white. Okay, so we're going to hit right here. There. Sloppy. That's what happens. You start painting too fast, you get a little, there's a difference between loose and sloppy. Loose is controlled sloppiness. I don't know what the hell I mean by that, but I shouldn't say that. I do know what I mean by that.
Controlled sloppiness.
Yeah, in other words, it's a freer gutsier stroke that is not, you don't labor over it over and over and over. A rendering for you're going really real, you may layer it and layer it and layer it. So I'm trying for kind of these warmer flesh tones now. We do a little bit of work in the, and I want to get away from it. Again, I could spend way too long in here. I know that for a fact. So know your shortcomings. Know where your weaknesses are, your bad tendencies. And that, the only way you get that is do it over and over and over again and do it wrong. And eventually you go, oh, smoke, if I don't do that anymore, I'm better off. And so that's really what it comes down to.
Don would like to know, why would you put oil on top of an acrylic painting?
Why would you?
Yeah.
Several reasons. Number one, you want a little bit more of a gutsy feel. You want to super pronounce things. Oil can be more forgiving. So if your acrylic is dry, right, and you put oil on top of it and you say, I'm going to really punch this color. So you punch that color and you go, oh, I don't like that. You can wipe it right off. You don't have to. You can make mistakes over acrylics without losing your acrylic painting. Hopefully that helps a little bit in understanding, because that is probably the biggest difference. I like it just because I like oil. I use a little bit thicker. Not that I couldn't use acrylics thick. I generally don't, but I like to use and get more of a loose kind of a stroke with it that has more viscosity, more, here comes a technical term, y'all, has more oomph.
More motion?
What is oomph? Yeah, more. So you see more of the artist's gutsy hand. And, you know, it's like what I used to hear about Sargent, about him painting and painting and painting and working something and then coming back with some simple strokes and making it all work. I don't know if that's true. I like to think it is, because I think a lot of us do that.
Next question.
You can overwork something and come back and fix it. Okay, I'm just about ready to put some little bit of that backlighting on him. And I'm going to use, I don't like that brush. So let's try that one. Okay. So that same yellow white, I've got it, still have it mixed up over here. And we're going to come in. Actually, I'm going to go a little whiter. There we go. Small brush. Went a little too long on that, so you just wipe it off. Down on his cheek. I even see a little bit around this eye socket right there. Okay, and a little bit on the cheek, and then it sneaks down. All right, just a sliver of light back there, and then a little bit more blue in that light, and a little darker, not quite as bright. It comes down to where his mustache is, up there, and then a little bit around his mouth and chin. So if you set it up properly, you add those little touches, it'll work beautifully. If you don't set it up properly and you put those touches in too soon, and I may have done that, I may have put them in a little sooner than I needed. A little bit better here. And I can go a little bit lighter back towards the tip and the wing of the nostril. You don't want to go too far with it. A little bit more up right here.
So Laura wanted to know, speaking of brushes, do you keep your brushes separate, ones for oils and others for?
Generally, yes, but what I'm using are, these brushes are older brushes that I'm using right now, and they are brushes that I have used in oil. Theoretically, it's better if you do it, but if you clean your, I'm pretty much a stickler for cleaning my brushes after I work, as many people know, and I know Anna knows, and anybody who's taken workshops with me know. So if you clean your brush thoroughly and you get everything out of it, you're probably okay.
But it is a good idea to keep separate.
It's a good idea. If you have two sets of brushes, I've got so many brushes. The brushes I'm using now for most of my oils are not these. All right, so we're going to put a little bit of some of those leaves in front. Let's see where we're at. I got 45 minutes, maybe. Not quite. We'll get some of these leaves. There's a leaf. A little bit of green into that color. Some of these leaves right down here. Trying, as I lift my brush up, I'm trying to give the right look to that edge. Get a little bit lighter. I can just see right. Nope, too light. Nope, too dark. Because it's sitting in front of him, I'm being a little more careful with the shape of that leaf. That's pretty accurate, actually. Pretty good. Now, I had to get some light on his pants too, don't I? A little bit. So, what am I going to do? I see some really nice. Now, I can do it a couple of ways. I think first thing I'm going to do is darken his pants. So I'm going to take the brown and the blue, put them off to the side, and probably a little more brown than blue in this case, because I want them a little warmer. But we're going to go a little darker, so it's a little more opaque. If I leave some of that transparent, it's because I want it there to create textures in the pants. Very dark right up in here. Okay, and then with the same color in the brush, I'm just going to add a little water and a little ochre to that same color. And I'm going to come in right here on the back side of his pants. Much the same as that kind of light is hitting. And I may want to brighten this up. I can see right now. I think I may want to brighten that up at the end. But we want to get a little light back in here. Keep it loose. And we can darken it just a little bit, just and add a little more texture as it comes down here and down in the front here. And then we will go back and add a little light to it. So again, with almost that same light color that I was using, kind of a warm white, a white and ochre, white and yellow, whatever you want to refer to it. And we're going to come right here and down the front. Pick up a little bit of that fold, bring it out, swing it back and let it fade away. And we'll do the same thing on this leg. A little bit more white in it because it's good. Still have to go into that background a lot. This ground plane needs a lot of work. There. That is literally the same colors I was trying to get. So I may have to strengthen that one more time. I didn't hit it strong enough. And I'm going to do a little bit of that up in here too. I don't like, tell you right now, this needs to come in more. Come in right to where his ear is. I have it way too wide. Fits his head better now. Okay. We'll take the same color I had on my brush just then and mix it to this color so I can come in one time and go lighter. I don't even know if I have it light enough yet.
Do you feel like you can make those kinds of corrections with acrylic?
What?
The kind of correction that you just made Do you feel like you can make those easier with acrylic?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not fighting with dry paint, so it's gonna be easier. Now, conceptually, because I have light here, I want to throw a little bit more light on this side of his scarf. Didn't like that. So I'm adding red to the color I just was working with. And we're going to go a little bit on this side. And if I look carefully, I can actually see pulls. And so now I'm consistent with my light. Important. So let's go in and do a few more of these leaves on top. And little beautiful pieces of sparkling light I just caught. I didn't see it earlier, but I see it now. Right besides here, coming through here. Here. I added more yellow to the color. Add a little bit more because it was a little too white. A little more yellow and green. We'll bring it right down to the post. And it's a bright yellow light on the flower, between the the leaf, between the leaves, on the back side of the leaf. Beautiful piece of light happening right there. So what I want to get is find enough shimmer in the lighting as I see it. That's why if you don't set it up and you don't spend your time setting it up, this isn't going to work. And I would absolutely, if I was going to do this, I'd probably be spending a lot more time doing what I'm doing now, as far as the underpainting, setting up for this. So you can see in some areas, I'm actually slowing down and being more careful. In other areas, I'm just plowing along and just getting as much info down as I possibly can. So I've got some vacant areas up in here. I definitely need to get to those right now. I can't leave them. So I added more blue to my base color that I had down there. And we'll come up here. It's a wrong color, but I'm not worried right now. It's only wrong if you compare it to this. Go back, constantly remix your greens, remix your blues, remix any of those kind of colors. When it starts feeling like it's working and it's active enough, then move on to another area and then come back and revisit. And I haven't stood back, so just real quick, back up. Okay, one thing I know I'm going to need to do, because I'm going to need to hit that ground plane, but I do want to get enough of this in. So let's take that light, which is a warm white. It's white. It's almost the same color. And let's hit this as it comes back over his leg, as it comes down. We'll clean that up as it goes, continuity. The top of it. Top of that. Painting acrylics from models are one of the joys, because truthfully, you can paint right over things. So you mess things up, you can paint right over them. You can with oils too. It's just more difficult. anything I do with acrylics, you can do with oils. It's going to take probably a little more time. That's maybe a little more difficult. Okay, so now we got the top of that bin, and there's going to be overlapping. So if it's too clean now, the reason it's too clean is I haven't done any, I haven't overlapped anything over it. All right. Take some of that blue and brown and work it down in here, scrub it a little bit. So I got to give some of that characteristic of what I see there. Okay, let's get a little bit of the ground plane going. I know I laid off of it for quite a while now. So I'll take my brush, kind of get most of the color out of it, move my iced tea. Don't dip. One of the things, be careful. You don't want to dip your brush into your iced tea or coffee. I say that because it works. I mean, you can paint with it, wouldn't even know the difference. The problem is you're drinking it. So what we're doing now is we're taking a warmer, lighter tone on that ground plane. And if it goes too yellow, I'm bringing just a touch of umber into it to help. And I'm just dragging, you can see how I'm just kind of barely letting that brush touch. And that will give me some of the characteristics that I'm after. Let me get back. That's working. Son of a gun. I haven't painted acrylics for a long time, and it's actually working. Shocked myself. Better that it works than doesn't work, huh?
Sorry, your phone kind of disconnected there for a second.
Did it?
It's okay now.
Is it okay now?
They're also, you never use a retarder, only water, not an extender.
No, I don't even own retarder. Retarder is oils. And if you want something in between, I'm going to tell you, try it water soluble oils.
I know they have extenders though.
Yeah, they do. They do.
clothes.
I just don't know why you'd use them. Because oils themselves, I mean, either if you want it to dry slower, use oils. The advantage of acrylics is that it dries fast and you can work over it. So why kind of monkey around with it?
Well,
That's my opinion. Okay. I'm not saying it's right, it's wrong. I like acrylics, and a lot of that has to do with my background for what acrylics has to offer. So let me first preface that by saying I actually have used and tried retarders, and I don't like them. So like Frank Lanza.
I think
Literally, if I'm going to use acrylics, I want it to dry fast. I want to be able to use what acrylics has to offer that oils doesn't. Oils is a slower drying time. And I haven't played with them enough, you guys, but I've found water-soluble oils to be really kind of cool. So
John Farnsworth was saying that Golden has some nice thinners which you can use instead of water to create more fluid paint and washes.
Yeah, it may work. I'm not the end all guy in acrylics. I know how to paint acrylics because I've painted it with them for years, but they've come out with other things and you can use those other things. Like I said, I'm a purist.
Do you think though, for students who are learning how to paint with acrylic, that it would be helpful to have an extender?
No,
just so that
I think the opposite's true. I think extenders is something you should learn to use once you learn how to use acrylics. The problem, here's the deal. People want to blend. Blending isn't.
And that's why we would use extenders to less.
I don't want people. I want people to learn how to create the illusion of a blend
without.
And because most of the time, blending just leads to overwork. So, I think it becomes very individual. I don't use them. It's that simple.
I wonder if that's because obviously you're used to them, but because you work faster than.
No.
Work faster.
No, I can do a super tight blend and make it as refined as any blend with just by what you do is you layer. You
Yeah.
literally layer and layer, and you wet the edge and you move that edge around, you wet it, and you can manipulate it. Acrylics dries fast. Okay, it doesn't dry immediately. And I think that's an important fact for a lot of people to keep in mind. It doesn't dry immediately, what does that mean? That means if you want to, you can go back into it and manipulate it. And once it's dry, if you just, and you want to blend something into it, paint it in there and delicately with a lot of layers and water. I mean, I'd have to show it. I know I'm not explaining it very
No,
well.
you're explaining, yeah.
I just think acrylics are a different medium, and you shouldn't try and use them just because you're used to oil. Learn the medium, learn what the medium. Let me give you a simple example. Pastels. Okay, you don't mix pastels on your palette. All right, you mix pastels on your painting, and you really don't mix them. You kind of layer them until you get the color you're after. So if you can think like that, you can actually work fine with this medium. Now, I have one thing I haven't done here. Okay, this is water. Ready? Now, while that's wet, you can paint into it. Okay, I'll paint into it, say, well, I don't like that, so I'm gonna wipe it out and I can get a different kind of an effect.
So while it's wet though.
While it's wet. And if I've gone too far, then I just go back and add more into it. Again, use acrylics for what acrylics has to offer. I actually paint very similar in oils. I don't paint the same way. If you guys have watched, I don't really blend. I don't really sit and blend anything. I like color on color, color next to color. You know, you may ask why. Very simply because all the art that I have always seen that I love is not labored. Now there are guys like Jerome that do some real incredible blending, and it comes down to what you personally like. Painting to me should be fun, I think. So if that's fun for you, do it. If it's not, do something else. So we're starting to get the characteristic. It's starting to look, with about 25 minutes left, it's starting to look the way I want it to. Is it exactly? No. And I guarantee you at the end, it won't be exactly. It'll be closer than it is now. But it'll have a good spontaneous effect. Remember, one of the things that I've talked about a lot is these demos are a form of plein air painting, which brings to mind something, by the way. Next week, I think we're going to be painting outside, a landscape up near where my sister lives. We're going to give it a shot, see from what she's been checking for us, and she can get good internet outside. And there's some stuff. Now, granted, at noon is not the most ideal time to paint plein air because the lighting isn't that, but we'll make it work. We'll pull something out of it.
Hopefully.
But that's what we're hoping. Other thing that kind of excites me is it appears that our Italy workshop may be going. So we're hoping it'll certainly is looking better from all the signs that we get from overseas. We're getting notifications that things are looking really good. So we're looking forward to it, man. I want to get back and paint in the Dolomites, paint in Venice. I mean, it's fun to do what we've been doing, painting, you know, from references, but boy, it's so much more fun to go out and do it on location. Put some of these strokes up over. So we're gonna start to get, now I'm looking in here and I'm saying that needs more light. Now I haven't needed to glaze anything. Kind of surprised me. Thicker paint, thicker, nice and bright yellow. I'm looking at that leaf. And I look down below it and I see one here. Now I need to put some of the vines in too, by the way. Some of the, and those are drawing. That's what I call those are drawing marks. The other thing I need to do is add a little bit of light to the grapes. This is touchy because you can get real overworked with this. That's too light. I bring a little bit more blue, a little more violet to it, a little gray violet. That's how I see it. I'm going to go more water. It's coming out more opaque than I want. That's why.
Laura wants to know is how is it working with acrylics on plein air? Do you use a spray bottle or anything to keep the paint wet?
You can. I don't. You can. I mean, everybody's going to find what works for them. I work just like I'm doing now. The only thing that I try and keep wet is the paint on my palette.
And you can use a spray bottle for that.
You can use a spray bottle for that. You know what I end up doing? I end up picking up water in my hand like this and dropping it on my paints. But you can use a spray bottle. I'm a slob. And I don't claim to be anything but. When I paint, everything goes pretty much to hell except the painting. Me, anything around me. So when people watch me paint, I tell them not to get too close. Get a little bit yellow in there. We're just building. I'm just reacting to what I see, literally. Some lighter lights up in here because I didn't start. I never like to start as light as I want to go or as bright as I want to go. So I always want to leave room to begin to use those as accents. And that's part of this rich layering that begins to occur. Like, oh, that looks just too darn simple. So we got to bring some activity over it a little bit here. I can see some right there. Back in here. I'll bring a little bit more ochre to that color. Up, it gets a little green. It gets a few little greens kind of floating up in here. So I just take the same color and add a little green to it. Now I'm not pulling that in, remember. But I do see some nice, rich, strong, kind of greenish dark colors right up in here. And I'm going to start in on the vines in a little bit because I don't want to wait till the very end. Let me go back to the grapes. Someone asked me a question while I was doing the grapes and I lost my train of thought.
Grapes in that bucket.
Yeah. Sometimes I put them in and then I take them out. In other words, I put too much in and then I will literally go back and paint some of the darks back in. Kind of fun. Haven't I haven't painted in acrylics for quite some time, except in class last semester. I think I did an acrylic still life demo this semester. So I really haven't done a lot of painting in acrylics, and I keep forgetting how cool they are, how much fun they are. So it was kind of fun to kind of get back into this. Now he has pattern also on his I can see it's very faint. So we're going to take on his scarf, we're going to take a color and we're going to go kind of dark. And then there's a little light in it. I can see it going this way, down in here, back in here. Okay, now let's go back, put a light into that. Can't be too light because it'll stand out too much. Let's see what this looks like. It's slightly warm too, so I can grab one of my warmer ochre colors. Let's try. That's too light. I could. As soon as I held it up to it, I could tell. Let's see what this looks like. That might work. It helps a little bit. Gives him a little more character. Now, but I also see that in the warm side of his face, I could probably, it's not real warm, could probably pronounce it a little bit more, get a little bit more light into it. Right there, probably down in here, the back. Let that dry. It looks pretty good. It's going to dry darker, and I know that. So I think I'm okay. If I'm not, I would glaze it, knock it down, meaning glaze it darker. So we're going to hit some lights, some really bright, sparkling white, yellow lights right in here on some of these leaves. Now, I don't know if that's on his arm. It might be. Some of it, it's some on the leaf and some on his arm. Then we get a little wonderful little movement right there, and then down there, and down. So I'm getting that nice move. I think I could pronounce that more. I just slid back. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lighten it and work on the edge. Now, inside edge, so it's a little bit more refined as we get around him. I'm going to take let's take a liner here. And got to be careful about this because this really can get over. Too heavy-handed, clumsy. Just loosen it up a little bit. Little lights. Give them that kind of the activity. Sometimes you can do that with a knife. If I have a clean one, because I've got a lot of oil dumped in all my knives, but I thought I cleaned one out. Maybe there we go. It's kind of clean.
The knives and do your brushes.
Oh, look, a drip. Enough activity. It allows your strokes to be a little bit more random and not as contrived as when you put them down with a brush. So we get a little bit of that. I'm gonna do that with a ground plane now. I'm just gonna take some white back into the color I was just using. A little bit more. And we'll kind of pop some areas.
Are you working on a glass palette?
Yeah, I'm working on a piece of plexiglass palette.
So can you scrape it off or just wet it? And then...
Yeah, I can get it off real
Maybe.
easy. What warm water will take it right off the palette at the very end. If you want to, when I clean my palette, that's pretty much what I'll do. It's giving me kind of the random characteristic of that ground plane. So what I'm going to do with this little liner, if I can, is I'm going to start to add some of the vines because I put them off long enough. Now I want kind of a neutral, kind of a warm neutral, not too dark. So it's kind of a blue, brown, white, maybe a touch of red in there. Get a nice tip on your brush. That's a good stroke. That's a pretty good one. Put a little bit more red on that color. And we'll put them in over here because they're a little bit more red. And since it's dry, so I'm not having, if this were oil, I'd be having a much more difficult time with this because I can actually put my finger down. And we get some nice in front. This is what some are behind, some are in front. So we're going to kind of pop some of these in. Let's get this one in a little bit better. Let's get this one in. One up above. One down here. One that comes down here.
Now, would you varnish your acrylic paintings afterwards?
Yeah, you can.
With
Varnish, acrylic varnish. You can varnish them even with there's all kinds of spray varnishes you can use. But you can varnish with almost any kind. You can even varnish them with an oil varnish. In fact, a lot of times if you're going to paint oils on top, it's really helpful to use an oil varnish. And honest to God, unless you get characteristics, sometimes it's almost impossible to tell the difference between your oil and your acrylic. A real acrylic aficionado could probably tell. And then some of those have a nice piece of white right back behind that leaf. Cooler side. Boy, I could see all kinds. I could go into this for hours. I see a cool hitting on the back of this leaf. I see some cools, and I see a beautiful lime color happening right about it. Not enough. Probably shouldn't be using this brush, but it's one I have in my hand now, and that's why I'm using it. It's all for time. Don't like that right there. Just needs more layering is all. The activity's looking okay. Some of this stuff down in here I don't like. It needs a little work. It's very painterly. I'm going to go in. Oh, you got about almost 5 minutes or so. I'm going to deepen this a little bit, add a little bit of detailing to some of these grape areas back here. Let's darken first. Blue, brown, a lot more opaque. Almost no water in this. And I can shape some of the leaves just by carving back a little bit. Shape that leaf. Cut that one back, so make it a little smaller. Come on down. It comes in front. Like that. Get some negatives. Could loosen that edge up a little bit. Now there's some little grapes. Right there. Right here. I'm being quiet because I'm thinking. I don't mean to say when I'm not quiet, I'm not thinking. Try and think the whole way through, but since I'm right at the end here. So hit a little bit of that, and then we'll hit a little bit of and a little bit of light on the grapes. What do we got here? Just about time, huh? So we're going to take there, get some I'm just hitting negatives around them. A little bit of light here. Back in here, it's just shape-oriented stuff. I just would need to come back, clean those up. But because we're getting farther away from the figure, it's not as crucial. Just about there. A couple touch-ups on the character. He's our star, and we want him to be pretty much refined. Try one more touch of light on his back and see if that helps. I kind of like it. And we'll take the reflected light back in his the back side of his face, punch it up one more time. Let's and any of the hit negatives now. Yeah, we've just about got it. I mean, I can absolutely just keep going on this. Probably do a little bit of work like I always do, but not much. We're going to keep it. I want to keep the integrity of the alla prima look to the piece, so I'm not going to really go in and delve into it a lot. Now, the one thing I haven't done, and I started doing it right at the beginning, and it's a perfect time to do it. is get your brush pretty clean. Take your white and your touch of ochre, which is the sky color. That's how we started the whole painting. So we got those two, and we go back and we clean up some of this stuff because so it can be real clumsy in the lay-in. And then just go back and etch away. So I've created leaf shapes where before it wasn't. Brighten the sky a little bit. Say behind him, just look to see if I can create a little bit better leaf shape here and there. And that's all you're doing, is you're dealing with the shapes. It's one of these things you could, if like that to me feels a little thick, so I might want to trim it down a little bit. Maybe those are a little too heavy, get a little bit better shape. Just hitting negatives is what you're doing, just hitting negatives. And see a nice bright leaf I can put right in there. But probably not going to go much further than that. It's, basically an acrylic piece that is what it is, which is pretty much what I kind of planned. I could see a little bit more striations that I could really pick up. I really didn't get the leaves or the weeds back in there, which is kind of that. And the bottom edge is softer, so I can just kind of soften them a little bit. So you can always play with that kind of stuff. Just add a little bit here and there to make it a little bit more the way you might want it to end up as a finished piece. So in any event, just standing back, looks okay. I could definitely use some more brights in here. He's looking pretty good. I don't quite like that transition in his cheekbone right there, but for where it's at now, it pretty much feels okay. I mean, I think that could come down about here a little bit more. Yeah. Okay. So you get the idea of hopefully you get the idea of the difference. And hopefully if you look at this painting and you look at it in conjunction with most of my oil paintings, they're going to pretty much look similar. They're not going to look that drastically different. And that's literally because whether I'm painting, I'm still using the same principles, the same thinking. The only thing that's different is the medium. And bye. Happy painting, everyone. Try some acrylics.
Thanks, everybody.